So David Dietz is a professor of criminal justice at College of DuPage and at Governor State University. He has extensively researched human traffic over an 8-year period, conducting a content analysis that includes hundreds of articles, research projects, and books on the topic. Now, this is important, what I'm going to say now. His current research proposal looks to use awareness and incentive-based motivation throughout the targeted communities to effect change within the Chicagoland human trafficking trade. Why does this matter? Well, it is very consistent with our aims here today. His research, is propelled by a desire to become an active contributor to common sense solutions and champion policies that will reduce the prevalence of human trafficking throughout the world, not just locally. David is also completing the proposed research as a student within the interdisciplinary leadership doctorate at Governor State University.
So yes, I'm David Dietz. I've done hundreds of hours of research. I've read plenty of articles, papers. If there's anything on Lifetime that has to do with human trafficking, I stop the channel and I watch it, right? So human trafficking is, I would say it's my interest, but it's really definitely more my passion. I have people in my immediate family that have come close to human trafficking, so that's the reason why I think I'm probably really passionate about that. I find it incredibly saddening that there is more human trafficking victims today, which are also synonymous and one and the same as modern day slavery. So if you want to think about human trafficking, really think about modern day slavery. So I tell people all the time, if you were upset about slavery in America, which I always get yes, thankfully, you should be outraged about slavery right now, about human trafficking in the world today, because the amount of slaves that went across transatlantic from that came from Europe, that came from Africa, that came over to America over a 200-year period is half the amount of what we have currently in the world today, by some estimations. So estimations range widely, so it ranges from anywhere from 3 million all the way up to 30 million people. So, I mean, that's a lot of people that we're talking about that are human trafficking victims. So I'm going to talk about what human trafficking actually is, definition-wise. I'll talk about what's being done, and hopefully within 15 minutes, I will also be able to talk about my proposal to try to affect some change for it. So certainly there's a lot of people that are trying to do something about it, so I'm just trying to throw my hat into the ring to help out as well. So, okay, without further ado. So what is human trafficking actually? Simply put, I think the best way to say is that it's modern day slavery, because I think that conceptualizes it really well for a lot of people. I think that by saying that it's trafficking, I think we end up actually disenfranchising what it really is. I think people disconnect from it a little bit more. It is slavery. You're forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to do. Also, I don't know how much you know about slavery or trafficking, but there's different forms. So where is it, who is affected is definitely going to range, but it can be sex trafficking, which is certainly heinous, but actually the ratio maybe 3-4 times to 1 of the people who are sex trafficking victims, they're actually labor victims. So there's people who are making clothes. So the reason why we can get $4 shirts from H&M, from Walmart, that's because somebody else is suffering in China, in India. You don't think about these things because when you walk into Walmart, it's conveniently hidden from you because it has an American flag on the front, but you turn it around, it says made in India. It's a little disheartening to find out that there might be as many as 10 million slaves in India, again, human trafficking victims. Also, I'll get into a little bit more, but to be a trafficking victim, you don't have to be transported. So if you think that a human trafficking victim is somebody who came from Europe in the back of a cargo haul and then ended up on the streets of Chicago, that's not what it is. That can be one form of it, but it can also be a runaway. So a 15-year-old who's scared, upset, whatever, with their family, they find their way out on the streets. Within 48 hours, they've got a fairly good chance that they're going to come into contact with a trafficker. Why? Because traffickers know that if you're a runaway, you're scared, you're going to go to a shelter, a bus stop, a train stop, and they're going to go there and they're going to be nice to you, and they're going to suck you into this world. So they're going to coax you into it. So again, trafficking doesn't always have to be by force immediately. It can be with some form of trickery, offering you a job, offering you safe harbor, whatever it possibly is. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking, according to Illinois at least, which we're talking about Chicago, so human trafficking is a person commits the offense of trafficking in persons for forced labor or services when he or she knowingly recruits, entices, harbors, transports, provides, or obtains by any means or attempts to recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, obtain by any means another person, intending or knowing that that person will be subjected to forced labor or services. So key there, labor or services, right? So it's not going to be just sex trafficking. It's not going to be just labor. It can be even a combination of the two. There's, again, if you look in factories around the world, even in this country, there's people who are being exploited because they are a forgotten about class, and they are treated absolutely horribly. So in India, not to keep going back to India, even though we're talking about Chicago, but in India there's an informal caste system that exists that used to be a formal caste system, and there's a group known as untouchables, and they're so low on the caste system that you literally are not even supposed to be touching them. And so when we look over here to America, we say, well, we don't have that system, but we kind of do. If you go out on the streets of Chicago, and again, talking about sex trafficking, you see a prostitute, and you might think, well, that's a prostitute. But it probably isn't just a prostitute. It's probably a trafficking victim, because they're probably being forced to be there. They've probably been enticed some way to be out on the streets. And you might think that they want to be there, and if they didn't want to, they would run away. But how fast can you run away from a pimp who's forcing you to stay there? How fast can you run away from a trafficking organization that knows where your family lives and might possibly go after your family? You know, you might be able to outrun them for a little bit, but where are you going to be able to go to? So definitely, what is human trafficking? I gave you the definition there. Where is it? It's all around the world, but it's absolutely 100% in Chicago for sure. Who is affected? Everybody's affected. So if the lowest classes are, you think, the ones who are affected, it affects us as well, because we get our clothes cheaper, we get our items cheaper, but then at the same time, as these trafficking rings become bigger and the organization groups become more popular, or more prevalent, they are able to get to more people. So that, what if you live in Chicago, and what if your daughter or your son runs away? And they're out on the streets, and they don't know what to do with themselves, and they're trying to make a point to you. And it's not just poor families either. That's the really important thing you have to keep in mind. It's not just poor families. So it's not like anybody's protected from human trafficking. There was a lady I just saw the other day, and when I say that I saw her on a TED Talk. So, but she was giving a speech, and she came from a middle-class neighborhood. They were making good money, and her daughter and her got into an argument, and her daughter left just to make a point. And when her daughter left, she'd ended up coming back for 57 hours. And when she came back, she had already been introduced to somebody in the trafficking ring, right? And you think, well, 57 hours isn't that big of a deal. So the girl stayed home for another 2 months, and then when she wanted to leave, she went back out on the streets again, and then she was gone for like 108 days. And she had gotten trafficked and used up and all sorts of other stuff. So again, nobody is exempt from human trafficking. Human trafficking can reach out and grab anybody. So up here, I have this somewhat to seriously blurry graph for you, but I think you get that it's the world. So as long as you can follow that it's the world, we'll be fine. I don't know how well you can see the different colors there, but you'll see where Russia and Europe are, and then America. It's a lighter green color, and also in Australia it's lighter green. That means that there's about 500,000 human trafficking victims or modern-day slaves there. And that seems pretty serious to think that we're in what many people would consider to be the greatest country in the world, and there's still 500,000 slaves existing, right? We're all having a great time today, but somewhere around this country, there's 500,000 slaves that are being exploited, forced to do things that they don't want to do. And again, that includes labor services, sex services, etc. So the only place where they can't seem to find any slaves and they can't find any human trafficking victims is Greenland. That seems to be the only place. So I guess if we have a really cold island and we make that the rest of the planet, we can get rid of human trafficking. Or we can use my idea, which I'm going to get to in a second. But then you'll see, let me use this for a second. You'll see that China and obviously India over here, which I mentioned India a couple of times. Again, India might have as many as 10 million slaves as of right now. So I'll talk a little bit, well, not a little bit later, very quickly actually, about what you can do to actually fight the trafficking and the human slavery that exists in all of these countries. And certainly trafficking has become a transnational thing. So even though 83% of the human trafficking victims in Chicago are domestic, it's still important to recognize that these trafficking organizations, there's not a trafficking organization that's in Europe and they're also in America and they're also in Mexico. They just communicate with the other organizations that are in the different countries. So it's like when you think about somebody getting smuggled from Mexico, it's not one cartel or one group of people that brings you from southern Mexico all the way up to Chicago. they'll bring you into the middle of Mexico, hand you off to another group of runners, they'll run you up to the border, then from the border you'll meet up with somebody else, they'll take you across the border, then you hike across the desert, right? Or if you take a different means. So they're connected in that way. So it's not like this big formal organization. They are organized. They do work with other groups. But I just wanted to show where it was at. And then this again is just touching on the fact that there is labor trafficking on the bottom right there. Those are Ugandan slaves. They were Ugandan slaves. They were actually rescued by a Chicago businesswoman, and she didn't have any experience with human trafficking. I believe she was like an accountant or something like that. But she had passion, and she wanted to do something. So if people are motivated, they go out and they make a difference. So I thought it was pretty inspiring that she did that. On the top right there, you'll see the different prices that you can pay for a human trafficking victim or a modern-day slave. And I like to use them interchangeably because I'm just trying to get the point across that human trafficking and modern-day slave are one and the same. But it used to be when we talked about slavery, again, adjusting for inflation, in this country, when you were to buy a slave, say when slavery was technically legal, you could pay upwards of $40,000 for a slave. Now, due to globalization and being able to move people around and being able to hide them so well, you can get a slave for as cheap as $90. There's actually an investigative journalist by the name of Benjamin E. Skinner, and he flew down to Haiti from New York. Took him 5 hours, flew down to Haiti, and he was able to meet with somebody, and if he wanted to, he could have purchased a 15-year-old slave, and he could have got the passport to get them back on the plane, and he could have been back in New York in another 5 hours. So it's pretty sad when you can get on a plane in New York, and in less than a day, you can arrive back with your own slave with a passport completely hidden. So again, it's not freed from anybody. Also working in the kitchen there was in Chicago, there was somebody who was forced to work in the basement of a China house. It was a China house buffet, and they were a human trafficking victim. They were told that they were gonna be offered a job. They were forced into the basement. They were literally shackled into the basement and forced to do dishes. So you might think, why don't they just hire somebody for $8? Because it's cheaper to pay somebody no dollars and have them wash their dishes for free. So I think Kevin Bales is a really prominent guy who's involved with this anti-slavery movement. And he has a really good quote. He says, "People don't enslave others to be mean. They do it for a profit." And I think that sings volumes to what it is. People do a lot of messed up things for money, right? I mean, I don't think we really need to, just thinking about Enron and thinking about WorldCom and all of that stuff, but certainly this is a little bit more egregious. And then I just wanted to give you a couple examples of some other human trafficking issues, and then I'll try to wrap up really quick. 2009, 44 adults were arrested for a child trafficking ring. In the same year, 257 calls went out to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. That's 5th overall. So if we don't think Chicago has a problem, we're just lying to ourselves because we were number 5. The New York Times did a national investigation, and they found out that Chicago was actually a hub for sex trafficking in 2003. So different laws. So what has been done? Different laws have been created for this. So there's Public Act 961464. That sounds very formal. That's why I like to say that. So it protects child prostitutes. And this is important because children are children. They're minors. That's why we say that they're minors, because they can't make decisions on their own. They're not fully autonomous yet. So somebody's forcing them into doing sex trafficking, even by coercing them or tricking them. You'll remember the definition. If you coerce somebody, you are now a trafficker. So it's good that we have this definitively put down, because now we can charge these people as sex traffickers. Before this law came out, I believe this was 2012, we didn't have a way to charge people with sex trafficking. So what would you do? If you don't have a law, you can't just say you're a bad person, I want to incarcerate you. So people were literally able to walk away after they were sex trafficking people. So we responded. This is what has been done. Additional laws, Public Act 720 and 725, ability to seize the assets from the traffickers, so this is great. And then they define trafficking, and that's the one that I read off to you already. And they also made prostitution a level 4 felony. So why do we need a new approach? Because the way that these laws work, they don't work correctly. So you can create a law, and that's really great, but if it's not working out, you'll need to do something else. What the law does is it arrests the prostitutes. So 75% of the arrests that take place are the prostitutes. The other 24% are the Johns. So that means 1% is the actual traffickers. That's who. So if you're not cutting that off, they're just going to keep going out and finding new girls, new guys that are impoverished, that are in trouble, and they'll just keep regenerating and coming right back. So we need a different approach. And if you really want to make a difference right now, these are some different sites that you can go to. The first one helps you identify the signs of trafficking, so you can see if there's somebody who you think is a prostitute, right? Oh, they must be a prostitute, they're just standing out on the street. If they don't move, if they stay still, if they're located by a doorway, if you see somebody come out and talk to them every couple of minutes, that might be a human trafficking victim. If they've got bruises, that might be a human trafficking victim. These are different things that you can look out for. There's a lot more. And then slavery footprint, that lets you know the things that you buy and the things that you're doing on a daily basis, what impact that has on the human trafficking world. And you'd be surprised. There was a lady, again, another TED Talk, she was she was really big in anti-slavery, and she found out that her slavery footprint was 47 slaves a year. And she was trying not to be involved with that. And still, because she bought a microwave, because she bought tennis shoes, because she bought jeans, all these things are made cheaper because they're made in other countries where we don't have to deal with that. So we're very privileged to be in this country, even where there are still human trafficking victims. And I didn't mention it earlier, but when I'm talking about the prostitutes in Chicago, there's anywhere from 20 to 25,000 prostitutes in Chicago. There's 5,000 arrests that take place a year. So again, what are we really doing to affect that change? I think going out to the community is going to be there 100% of the time. So if we can get the community involved in looking for the signs, it's a lot better than having one patrol car driving around arbitrarily looking. So that's all I have, and I know I went way over my time, and I really apologize. Thank you.